back to the NPTEL online certification course Tribal Studies in India Interdisciplinary Perspectives and Approaches. Today we are going to do our lecture number 36, and this lecture is a continuation of where we have stopped in the last lecture, in the last class, that is tribes in post-colonial India, tribal administration and autonomy provisions. Now, in the last class, to have a brief recap of what we have done in the last class, we specifically look at autonomy provisions, particularly the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule. Now, when we talk about the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule, it is important to understand that these schedules were necessarily not the gift to the tribal communities. There were a lot of struggles, there were a lot of demands by the tribal communities themselves during the time of the drafting of the constitution, that their interests and their rights be protected, their interests be safeguarded. One of the way in which the Indian nationalist leaders tried to address the tribal issues or the tribal aspirations essentially by coming up with these two schedules, that is the 5th schedule and the 6th schedules. Now, the 5th schedules mostly pertains to the mainland part of India, and when it comes to the 6th schedule, it is essentially for the northeastern or tribal communities in the northeastern part of the country. Now, in terms of the structure of autonomy, these schedules are very different. In a sense that in the 5th schedule areas, you see the governor has a very prominent role, but in the case of 6th schedule, you will see that there is a far more effective decentralization of power, and this decentralization of power essentially is enabled by the creation of autonomous district councils. Now, at the same time, you will see that these autonomous district councils are endowed with a lot of powers and responsibilities, and these powers and responsibilities work towards protecting the interests of the tribal communities. Now, like I said, not all tribal communities in India are under 5th schedule or in the 6th schedule. Initially, during independence, let us to only talk about the 6th schedule case. It was only in today's state of Mizoram, Meghalaya, where the 6th schedule was enforced. But now you will see that the 6th schedule has been extended. The provision of the 6th schedule has been extended in the in several parts of Assam. For example, in the Karbi areas as well as the Bodo areas. Now, in the mid 80s, you will see that the provisions, the 6th schedule provisions was extended to Tripura, where today tribal communities in Tripura are under the they have their own separate tribal autonomous councils. Now, in the northeast, you will see that many other states or states like Manipur came up with their own structure of autonomy. In Assam also, definitely some communities enjoy their own autonomous provisions. But in this lecture, we will begin by trying to understand some kind of political arrangement specifically which are outside of the purview of the 6th schedule. Now, most of the time this structure of autonomy, they are known as statutory autonomous councils, and like I said these are councils which are outside of the purview of the 6th schedule. It is important to understand because it covers a very large stretch of land. It also covers a large population. Now, in the case of Manipur, in my previous lectures I have talked about it, that Manipur is predominantly a hill inhabited by tribal communities, particularly in the hill areas or in the hill districts, and these hill districts constitute about 90% of the total geographical area of the state. However, the state the tribal communities have been perpetually denied any form of provisions under the 6th schedule. Now, the state government or the government of Manipur have come up with its own legislations that will specifically cater to the administration of tribal areas. Now, in Assam as well, some tribal communities today have 6th schedule provisions, but there are many tribal communities who are outside of the provisions of the 6th schedule. So, therefore, apart from the autonomous councils that are under the 6th schedule, the state of Assam and Manipur also have statutory autonomous councils for specific communities. These councils have been created through laws and legislation, through laws which are passed by their respective state legislative assemblies. So, basically the 6th schedule is a constitutional body, whereas in the case of the statutory autonomous councils, they are mostly created or established by legislations which are passed by their own respective state legislative assemblies. Now, in Assam, besides the North Kachar Hills, the Karbi Anglong and the Bodoland Territorial Area the Bodoland Territorial Area District, the state government of Assam has set up several other autonomous councils for specific communities. These include the Raba Hasong Autonomous Council, the Tiwa Autonomous Councils, the Mising Autonomous Councils, the Thengal Kachari Hill Autonomous Councils, the Sonowal Kachari Autonomous Council, and the Deuri Autonomous Councils. Now, despite that these autonomous councils are not essentially or exactly under the under the provisions of the 6th schedule. They are more or less similarly structured according to the autonomous district councils under the 6th schedule. So, however, today the presence of these three parallel systems of governance, one is the council, then the state government departments and the Panchayati Raj institution, resulted into a lot of confusion in terms of administration. Now, all of these councils have their own duties and responsibilities. Now, in any normal district, you will see that the district, the deputy commissioner, the deputy commissioner or the deputy magistrate, the DM is the head of the district. Now, but in the context of areas under 6th schedule, you will see that there are certain kind of clash when it comes to their administration in terms of what the district administrator has to do, what the autonomous district council representatives have to do, or what the state governments departments have to do. So, many a times because of this existence of these three parallel systems of governance often resulted into confusion in terms of administration. Now, another important problem which is commonly associated with these councils is that they do not cover non-contiguous villages, meaning the villages under the jurisdiction are not all connected or located close together. So, many a times you will see that if you look at the autonomous councils under the 6th schedule, you will see that they tend to be more or less in a compact geographical area. It means that the entire area is declared a schedule area, and this once it is declared as a schedule area, there all the villages which are under the areas are directly under the provisions of 6th schedule. Now, in the case of these statutory councils, you will see that it does not cover it is not geographically or territorially contiguous, in the sense that some villages are part of it and some other villages are located elsewhere are part of it. So, there is this no geographical contiguity, right, which resulted in problems in terms of administration. In some areas, communities other than the intended beneficiaries, including both tribal and non-tribal groups, have lived there even before these councils were created. So, what is happening is that when these autonomous councils like Raba, Tiwa, Mission autonomous councils are created, what happened is that they are targeted to specific communities. Now, when this problem of geographical continuities, this idea of covering non-contiguous villages resulted into a problems where the intended targets of these autonomous councils are actually excluded. At times, communities who were supposed not to be part of this are included. So, it can result into a lot of messy kind of administrative situation. Now, let us come to Manipur. In Manipur, autonomous district councils were established under the Manipur Hill Areas District Council in 1971. The Act divided all the hill areas of the state into 6 autonomous districts with its own district council. Now, there has been always district reorganization in Manipur. So, initially Manipur was it have only 6 districts. Now, today it is divided into I think 16 districts today. So, but we are going to use the old one, because particularly when the law came into being, there were only 6 district council. One is the Chandel district council, second is the Churachandpur district council, third is the Sadar Hills autonomous district council, fourth is the Manipur North autonomous district council, fifth is the Tamenglong autonomous district council, and the last is the Ukhrul autonomous district council. Now, each of these district councils have 24 members. They also have an executive committee which includes a chairman who is also the chairman of the executive committee, a vice chairman, 5 other members nominated by the chairman from the council. These councils have powers to manage different areas such as building and maintaining roads, bridges and public buildings, running schools up to class 8, operating dispensaries and health centers, managing water supply and sanitation, overseeing irrigation and agricultural water schemes. Now, I wanted to dwell some time on the Manipur district council, essentially because it provides us the kind of challenges that tribal communities in Manipur face. Now, when the Act came into force, there was a lot of enthusiasm among tribal communities in terms of that they were to be granted some kind of autonomy provisions. Now, Manipur demographically and geographically, if you look at it, the non-tribal communities, particularly the Métis, who are also the majority demographically, socially, culturally and politically, they inhabit mostly the plain area, that is in the valley areas, as the Imphal areas. Now, the hill communities belonging to Naga, Kuki, many other tribal communities, they live mostly in the hill areas. Now, elections to the councils were conducted, and it was functioning for some time. But then there was this strong demand, desire among Manipur tribal communities to be that 6th schedule be extended in the state of Manipur for the tribal communities, and all these existing autonomous councils be upgraded to the status of 6th schedule. Now, it resulted into a protest and unrest for a long time, and for 20 long years these autonomous district councils in Manipur were defunct. It means that they were not in operation. Now, what this means is that the effort to decentralize power in Manipur actually in some sense was a failure, in a sense that the tribal communities were not very happy with the provisions, because if you look at the difference between autonomous district council and councils which are formed under the state law, you will see that the dominant communities in state can actually continue to exert their influence or continue to exert their hegemony among the smaller or minority communities. Now, in that kind of situation, what happens is that many a times these councils are unable to protect and protect the interests of these communities. It resulted into a lot of tensions, it resulted into a lot of contestations. Now, in the case of the district councils in Manipur, you will also see that the number of administrative responsibilities, the number of powers that are being enshrined, the number of powers that are being endowed to this council are far more weaker and lesser as compared to the 6th schedule, as compared to the autonomous councils under the 6th schedule. So, what is essentially mean is that there are these provisions actually are in many ways uncomparable to provisions under the autonomous district council of the 6th schedule areas. So, it was for this reason that there is a lot of tensions when it comes to the state like Manipur, where there are a lot of communities, and these communities actually aspire to have a higher form of autonomy. So, even today, despite all these persistent struggles and persistent articulation of aspirations, the 6th schedule is not yet extended in the state of Manipur. Now, that is an entirely different story, but I just wanted to highlight what the context of Manipur. Likewise, in Assam also you will see that these territorial 6th schedule autonomous district councils were not directly enforced in a day. So, the Bodos were aspiring for some kind of autonomy. Likewise, in Tripura also, the communities in Tripura were aspiring for autonomy for a long period of time. There were a lot of struggles, there were a lot of movements, and after a prolonged struggle, they were granted some kind of autonomy, and that came in the form of 6th schedule. So, likewise in many parts of northeastern India, you will see that many communities aspire to have some form of autonomy provisions, because they see these autonomy provisions as a way to protect themselves from the larger dominant communities, but also at the same time to enable them to continue their customs, their traditions, and also ensure that their customs, their traditions, their way of life are being protected. Now, another important structure of autonomy when it comes to the tribal areas is the Panchayats extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1966. In short, it is often known as the PESA. Now this PESA is particularly important because after the 1990s, you will see that there has been a real effort on the part of the government of India to actually decentralize power all over, and this decentralization of power was no longer limited to communities, in the sense that it should not only be tribal communities who are getting some kind of autonomy or decentralization of power. Now, you will see that during 1993-1994, you will see that urban local bodies, for example, have been granted a lot of autonomy in terms of undertaking developmental activities, in terms of raising revenues, so on and so forth. So, after that we begin to see similar kind of changes or similar kind of efforts in the form of Panchayats extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996, particularly in tribal areas. So, apart from the constitutional provisions of 5th schedule, there was a felt need by the tribal communities to further preserve and protect their forest dependent livelihoods through provisions of self-rule. The enactment of Panchayati Raj system through the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992, which aims to decentralize the governance process and empowering the grassroots level institutions to govern according to the local needs, provided much needed impetus to the autonomy demand of the tribal communities. Now, this is what I was talking about. In the early 1990s, with the Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992, where the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment was specifically introduced to decentralize power in villages, in rural India as well as in urban India, which will enable local communities to be part of the governance systems, right, where power is no longer centralized. Power is becoming centralized, and ideas of development policies, socio-economic issues are no longer coming from top to bottom. It started coming from bottom to top as well. So, in that kind of situation, the idea was that, the view was that it is really an opportunity even for tribal communities to actually envisage the extension of such kind of decentralization of power, which eventually came in the form of PESA 1966. Now, the idea of the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, the spirit behind that introduction is very, very important, because it aimed to decentralize the governance process and empower people, citizens in terms of governing at the grassroots level. So, these developments happen in the backdrop of several movements occurring simultaneously in tribal areas, centered on the issues of self rule, that is the self rule movement, our rule in our villages, primarily rights over the forest resources, diverting forest land for industries, that is land acquisition. The prominent organization which pressed this demand was the Bharat Jan Andolan under Dr. B.D. Sharma, who once was Commissioner of Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. Now, like I said, a discussion of autonomy, a discussion of the question of political issues among the tribes cannot be done without really understanding the context in which this demand emerged. Now, in the context of tribal communities, it most of the time have to do with the question of resources. Now, in 6 scheduled areas, you will see that these autonomy provisions actually enable tribes to continue to govern forests, govern lands, prevent the land alienation by preventing the land transfer from tribal to non-tribal areas. But in the 5th schedule, what we continue to see is that there has been a gradual transfer of lands, resulting to a lot of land alienation, land dispossession. Likewise, there is a lot of changes happening, particularly in forest areas, with more than 75% of tribal communities in India are being forest dependent. So, there has been this continual appropriation of forest resources, which deny tribal communities their rights to access forest resources, and this resulted into a lot of economic deprivation. This resulted into a lot of poverty among tribal communities. Now, therefore, the movement that actually demand autonomy provisions essentially was to protect against the continued alienation that is happening in terms of resources, but also that will enable tribes to govern themselves in terms of their everyday life, in terms of their socio-political issues. Now, in this context, a very important organization is the Bharat Jan Andolan, which was led by Dr. B.D. Sharma, a very, very prominent personality when it comes to the tribal communities in India. Now, the Bharat Jan Andolan and one of the prominent grassroots organization, National Front for Tribal Self-Rule, demanded enactment of separate laws for the tribal areas by extending the provisions of Panchayati Raj and municipalities in the scheduled areas. So, basically there was this demand, taking the inspiration from the 73rd, 72nd and 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, that such kind of provisions also needs to be extended to the scheduled areas, essentially because it championed the idea of grassroots democracy. It championed the idea of the rule of the people, the rule of the commoners. Now, therefore, these movements in the form of led by the Bharat Jan Andolan and the National Front for Tribal Self-Rule, they began to demand the extension of these constitutional provisions of Panchayati Raj and municipalities in the scheduled areas, particularly in the 5th scheduled areas. Consequently, a special committee was formed under the chairmanship of Dilip Singh Bhuria that came to be known as the Bhuria Committee, where B.D. Sharma was also incorporated as an expert member. As per the recommendation of the Bhuria Committee, the Panchayat's extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996 was enacted in the 5th scheduled areas. And another milestone was achieved with following the recommendation of Bhuria Committee, where PESA was being introduced and enacted in the 5th scheduled areas. Now, what are the provisions of PESA? What does PESA try to achieve, which 5th schedule alone somehow did not? One, Gram Sabha at the Para, Machra and Tola levels, in the sense that at all levels there will be Gram Sabhas. So, basically in Gram Sabha, it is the voice of the people. The people are actually who are having the power. So, at every level there has to be, all decisions have to be taken by the community through Gram Sabha. Gram Sabhas to protect the traditions, beliefs and culture of the tribal communities, local disputes to be resolved by the Gram Sabhas, Gram Sabhas to manage and protect common properties based on the traditional systems of management and protection. The administration to seek permission from the Gram Sabhas in case of land acquisition. Gram Sabhas to have the rights over minor forest produce. Powers to restore land to the tribals and control over money lending to tribals. Tribal welfare activities by social organizations and local plans and sub-plans for the development of tribal areas and communities. Gram Sabhas to have the control over local markets and mills. Gram Sabhas to have rights to control the distillation, prohibition and manufacturing of liquor. District panchayats to have rights and powers similar to those panchayats falling under the 6 schedules. Now, you will see that the provisions of PESA actually tries to put autonomy, try to grant autonomy to the community. Now, the discourse of the autonomy in terms of it actually the PESA actually shift the discourse in terms of locating the question of autonomy to the community to the Gram Sabhas. Empowering the Gram Sabhas essentially become important because it is no longer a question of autonomy being granted by creating another institutions, but by ensuring that the community is the one who, the autonomy lies in the community. It is these autonomy provisions is for the community themselves. Now, two Gram Sabhas, the Gram Sabhas actually was to uplift, was to protect, was to safeguard the interests of the communities in terms of protecting their traditions, beliefs and culture. At the same time, the Gram Sabhas also should have the power and the rights to address matters pertaining to resources, particularly forest resources, and also will have the right to restore lands to the tribals. Now, like I said, one of the most serious issue concerning tribal communities is the question of land in the nation, and another issues like money lending, so on and so forth are also definitely pertinent. But two issues that are particularly pertinent when it comes to resources is on the question of forest and land. Now, the Gram Sabhas according to PESA will have the right, will have the rights over minor forest produce. Basically, the community will have the rights over minor forest produce. Likewise, they should have control over the local markets and mills. They should also have the right to control the distillation, prohibition and manufacturing of liquor. So, in terms of concept and in terms of ideas, the provisions under PESA or the Panchayat extension to the scheduled areas is a very a powerful concept, in the sense that the idea of autonomy lies with the community themselves, and without the community, bypassing of the community is no longer possible. It is one cannot imagine any other form of democratic form of organizing community beyond the Gram Sabha. So, the Gram Sabha is at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of the structure of the governance, but what PESA actually did is that trying to really give a legal recognition to the community in terms of deciding, in terms of governing themselves, in terms of granting them rights to their resources, whether it be land or whether it be forests. So, the state legislation on scheduled areas should be in consonance with the tribal customary laws, social practices of community resources. PESA also has provision of reservation of half the seats in the panchayat for STs, and the chairperson should be reserved for STs. The northeastern states that fall under 6 scheduled areas where autonomous councils are established are not governed by PESA, as they already have their own autonomous councils responsible for governance. Now, you will see that the demand for PESA is very strong in the 5th schedule areas and not so much in the 6th schedule areas. Like I said, if you compare and contrast the autonomy provisions in the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule, you will see that the 6th schedule areas from the start have a system of autonomy. The structure of governance is in place where the communities were given the right to protect their interests, to continue with their customs, to continue with their traditions. There was something that was already there, an institution, a structure was already in place. But in the case of the 5th schedule, that was not the case. The community have a very minimal role when it comes to protecting their interests. Now, PESA in many ways was very hopeful in terms of granting autonomy to the communities, in terms of protecting the interests of the communities, in terms of reversing the different kinds of injustice that the community have experienced. Now, so through these lectures and in the last lecture, you will see that in India there are different structures of autonomy which are being enforced in tribal areas. Two most important structures that we talk about is the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule. They continue to be the architecture of tribal autonomy. Beyond it also, several states like Mizoram, Nagaland and even in the state of Manipur, there are special constitutional provisions under Article 371A, under Article 371C, under Article 371G that specifically address these particular states where they are enforced. Within that also, within the state of Mizoram, although it's a tribal state where tribal constitute the majority, you will see that there are also intertribal tensions in the sense that Lai, Changma and Mara wanted to be protected from the dominant Mizo communities. Now, the 6th schedule in some sense serve as a way to protect their interests by the fact that any laws cannot be directly implemented in the scheduled areas, give them some kind of protection. Likewise, today in Assam, in Tripura, you will see that this many tribal communities today are under the provisions of the 6th schedule. So, these different structures of autonomy have been implemented in the Northeast India, which actually protect and preserve the rights of tribal communities. Now, in the 5th schedule areas, there was not necessarily the case. So, therefore, you continue to see a lot of resentment against the provisions of the 5th schedule, through which there are a lot of communities, there are a lot of activism that actually demanded that the structure of autonomy needs to be revamped. So, this came in the form of PESA, where PESA actually recognized the power of the community by granting a lot of power to the Gram Sabhas. Now, today if you look at the entire structure of autonomy, but you will see that one cannot but talk about the history of colonialism in terms of how colonial laws and legislations continue to inspire the structure of autonomy in tribal areas. Now, in the following lectures, we will continue to look at different constitutional provisions pertaining to tribal communities, and it is important to really understand the historical context, at the same time how these provisions are being modified, adjusted, readjusted over a period of time. And with this I will end my lecture. Thank you so much.